Okay, I'd love to get started on tonight's discussion. My name is Andrea. I'm with Inspire Advantage alongside Katie and Aryaman here, who will be introducing themselves momentarily. Tonight's discussion is all about crafting the perfect med school application and what that looks like. We'll be going over quite a few things actually. So we'll be going over how to tell your own story, building a comprehensive application, obviously insider tips on each of the key components, application mistakes to avoid, and we love to leave a Q&A as well. So the reason that we love doing that is it gives you a moment to get up close and personal with our admissions counselors and really ask all of those questions, right? Whether you need us to clarify a certain point, or maybe you're stuck at a certain point in your application and you're really looking for a little bit of inside help, or you're just starting your application. That is what we're here for. That is what we want to support you with. So yes, we love to do that Q&A. In terms of what is happening in tonight's discussion, how long we're running it, we'll be running this discussion for about an hour. It is recorded, and you will receive a recording within a day or two. That's always the number one question we get. So before I pass it off to my wonderful co-panelists, I just want to take a moment to introduce who we are. Whether you've been on these webinars before, or I know there's a ton of new faces in the crowd, we're really excited to have you here. As mentioned earlier, we're Inspire Advantage. We're a globally recognized admissions consulting and test prep firm with over 16 years of experience. We specialize in helping students gain admission to top graduate healthcare programs, including medical, residency, dental, veterinary, PA, nursing school programs, all with a 94% acceptance rate, something we are incredibly proud of. We believe in starting early, which is why we offer something called pre-health advising for college freshmen. So what does our team do? Well, our team helps students build a tailored academic timeline, including course selection and GPA strategy, find impactful experiences like research, shadowing, clinical and non-clinical volunteering, extracurriculars, and leadership roles. And then from there, we really help make their application stand out from the rest with a stellar personal statement and interview prep. These steps lay a strong foundation to help our applicants differentiate themselves from the crowd and, of course, make a leaving impression. In addition, our tutors provide personalized one-on-one test prep for the MCAT, DAT, and the GRE. We begin with diagnostic tests and then go into custom study plans and interim progress tracking. And our students do see a score increase. So on average, we see 15 points on the MCAT with 45 plus hours of tutoring. And then our 60-hour program actually includes score guarantees of 515 for the MCAT, 21 for the DAT, and 320 for the GRE. What happens next? Well, when it's time to apply, we have something called an all-inclusive application program, which offers unlimited support through the entire application cycle. So this includes crafting a personalized narrative and school list, perfecting personal statements and secondaries with unlimited edits, providing interview prep, scholarship guidance, and of course, waitlist strategy. We're by our student side until they receive their acceptance. Our goal is very clear. It's very simple. It's to really create the most competitive candidates and applications, ensuring our students shine in the competitive admissions landscape. If you'd love to learn more, if you'd like to learn more, we offer personalized consultations via video, phone, or email. No matter where you are in the application process, we're here to help you. We're here to support you. We definitely encourage you to book that one-on-one. With that being said, I'd love to turn it over to my panelists here tonight to introduce themselves and get going with tonight's discussion.
Hey everyone, my name is Aryaman. I am currently an interventional radiology resident at Johns Hopkins. Just a quick little backstory about me. I am from the Midwest, Indiana, where I'm right now, visiting some family. And I left to go to Duke, North Carolina, to do biomedical engineering. Didn't actually plan on being a doctor. Wasn't really in the books, but I worked for a little bit as an engineer, realized it was not the path for me, and decided to apply to med school. So a bit non-traditional in that sense, but very fortunate to have been accepted at Johns Hopkins for med school. Went there, had a great time, and then stayed back in Baltimore to do residency. I'll pass it on to Katie.
Cool. So I'm Katie. I am currently in my 4th of 6 years in plastic and reconstructive surgery residency at University of Wisconsin. after attending medical school at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. Originally from California, so I've been all over. I have lots of years of educational courses and teaching courses under my belt just because I find it interesting, and I've been able to use those, tons with Inspira. So thanks for having us and letting us chat with you. We love talking about this. It's can be a really challenging process. So hopefully tonight helps make things a little bit easier for you, but we're also available as advisors separately outside of this if needed. So anyways, let's get started. Thanks for letting us talk with you guys tonight. So I'll start. So importantly, when we're talking about making the best medical school application possible, it's really about standing out. And that is hard to do because all the people you're applying with are typically really great people and applicants, and they've done all the work and the research to have a good application. So how do you stand out, and how does your application make an impact? And truthfully, the answer to this is more than just checkboxes. And generally, my answer to this is being yourself and being authentic and letting that kind of shine. So it's more than just checkboxes in that, I technically have a volunteer opportunity and a leadership opportunity and a, clinical opportunity. It's really, ideally, if you have the time and flexibility to do it, it's about creating this longitudinal display of passion or interest for the field. And so, like I said, more than just check boxes, it's creating this narrative. And you're going to hear that word a lot tonight, because that is what makes a great application. That's what makes you stand out. Oh, sorry. There you go.
All right. So you're going to hear a couple themes throughout tonight. And we're going to harp on kind of some of the same messages. So really try to pay attention to those. And one of them is going to be, what is your story? Now, one thing I'm going to take back, we're going to tonight probably talk about what the most perfect or ideal med school application looks like, right? And we realize that realistically, that's not going to be your application. All of you are coming from different life stories and backgrounds and situations. And so you're going to have to learn how to adapt this to your own life. And this is also a part where working with somebody can really help. But in the meantime, let's figure out what your own story is. How do you want to present yourself to this admissions interviewer, right? Someone's going to read your application. The first thing they're going to get is just a piece of paper. So how do you translate that into words in a really succinct and beautiful way? They're reviewing hundreds, if not thousands, of applications. And so finding and being able to put yourself on a paper is tricky, but it's going to be important, right? And one of the big questions you have to answer along the way is, why did you want to pursue medicine? And it has to be a compelling reason. It has to be something that you put a lot of thought into. And if you did put thought into, you have to, again, translate that onto paper. So again, we're going to talk about a lot of things tonight that are going to be similar themes, but it all comes down to your story and narrative.
So more on that topic, kind of going a little bit more in depth here. When we're talking about a narrative, what we're talking about is this, continuous longitudinal theme that is apparent throughout, kind of woven throughout all aspects of your application. And now when I say that, I don't mean, oh, my thing's going to be research. And so all of my experiences, all of my volunteering, all of my whatever have to be one-dimensional. I don't mean that. But let's say you have an interest in you really in your future career, and just when you wake up in the morning, something that drives you is improving access to, say, underserved populations in your area. So that theme, if that is your why medicine, if that is what drives you in the morning to pursue this path, then that idea is part of what makes you you, part of what makes you distinct and unique in this journey. And that needs to be displayed in multiple places throughout your application, and not just, I did a weekend volunteering at this, clinic. Really what you want to see is this longitudinal application of this interest that you have. And that is the ideal, optimal way to display. Like Ariman said, that is not always going to be what you get, because sometimes school is hard, you're juggling work and all of these opportunities, and you can't quite get all of them to be, you know, these like years-long activity, and that is totally reasonable. But ideally, you have this interest that you've displayed throughout your application. And importantly, especially with your writing opportunities in your application, you want to show and not just tell. And that is kind of like a vague statement that really just means, instead of saying, I did these things, explain like what brought you to those activities, and not just what brought you to them, but what you learned, what your interactions were like in those opportunities, what patients affected you in that, you know, clinic that you volunteered at, and what did you learn from it, and what will stick with you, things like that. Like, not just I worked in a clinic and I did 20 hours there. Really show what that experience was for you. And then I already talked about the threading the common theme. This is so important, and not just in your primary application, but also, well, your personal statement is part of your primary, but it should be there as well. And then in your secondaries as well, you want this to be a consistent kind of demonstration of passion or interest.
All right. So there's a lot of components to the application, obviously, right? Your primary, secondary, MCAT, your letters of rec, go on and on. So you do want to be strategic. There is actually a little bit of game to be played when it comes to med school applications and admissions. It comes down to timing and what schools you select and what experiences you highlight. So strategic experience selection. I think there's two things that matter in this. One is, once you nail down what that narrative or the theme is, right, your experiences have to align with that. Not necessarily just like in the name, but in how you describe it. Like if your kind of narrative is service and volunteering, then I would expect one of your most meaningful activities to be about service and volunteering. And then maybe another one about how you expanded that into another kind of interest or took a branch off of that. So I think that really matters, especially when you talk about your experiences. And then going back to the show, don't tell. So I think a couple good examples that we see are, like Katie mentioned, right? Again, if your niche is volunteering and service, spent this time at a clinic, and you say, oh, it's really important and in fact impactful to me. Great, but then tell me the next step, right? You don't want the reviewer to ask the question in their head, like, so what next, right? That question should be answered in your writing. So for that example, if I see that someone wrote, I spent 20 hours in this clinic or in the ED helping patients and it was impactful, and in my head I go, okay, so what do you take from it? I should see that answer then, right? Like, tell me about a specific patient that you spoke to or how you helped them, right? It could be as simple as you noticed they were cold and you gave them a blanket or a bottle of water, right? You're not clinicians. We're not expecting you to go into the ED and be house and start diagnosing people. So it's those small things that you do, but that you remember and you write about and you talk about why it mattered to you and why it maybe mattered to that person. And that is what will get it. It's not that you have to win greatest volunteer in the world award, but it's you did something that mattered to somebody else's life, and then it made a difference to you, and all of that made you want to pursue medicine. So these are the things that matter.
So some components that make or break your application, and make or break is maybe strong, but some components that influence the strength of your application. Your personal statement. So when I was a medical student applying for residency, I got some advice on my personal statement that I always pass on to folks when I work with them or in these types of webinars. And that is 90% of personal statements that will cross a reviewer's desk are fine. They are just fine. They say generally all the same things. I did these activities and I learned a lot and I want to be a doctor. And here's why. I had my family had some medical interaction, and I saw how the doctor was able to work with my parent in the hospital, and I want to be a doctor. Some generic kind of vague thing that is just fine. There's no red flags. There's no outstanding components. It's just kind of like a generic story that I think a lot of applicants think we want to read as reviewers. And that's okay, but it's not going to do anything for your application. 5% of personal statements that we read are concerning, red flags. Someone said something funky in that personal statement and I don't want to interview them. That's rare, but it does happen. And then 5% of personal statements are so meaningful and impactful for the reader because of their authenticity and sometimes uniqueness, that they make me or they make the reviewer want to interview that person. I, from reading this, have to talk to this person more. That is the personal statement we are aiming for. And the key to it is that it is personal. So I'm not saying you need to divulge your deepest secrets, but it should be authentic to you and not just what you think we want to hear as a reader. There'll be more about this, but that is like my little pedestal. Other important things, letters of recommendation. So these are hard sometimes to get in school because they're just a professor that you were in class with once, or, you know, for one semester. But really, these are an art. Crafting and culminating these letters of recommendation, strong letters of recommendation, is an art. It's a relationship that you build with someone with partially with the intention of understanding that you're going to need them to say some nice things about you, that you're a hard worker, you're a good person, and all these things. So letters of recommendation should not be kind of like on the back burner. They should be something that you're thinking about constantly. Who am I going to ask and how can I build that relationship so that they can speak on my behalf? And then extracurriculars, of course, these are kind of, they can sometimes feel like checkboxes, but my advice on selecting and demonstrating your extracurriculars are make them something that you enjoy doing. So I enjoyed teaching a lot when I was a pre-med. And so a lot of my volunteer clinical opportunities, everything I could kind of incorporate with teaching, I did because I enjoyed doing it. So it made it feel less like a checkbox and more like something I looked forward to. So you of course, need to include those and then figure out how to best advertise yourself through those extracurriculars.
All right, some little tips and tricks along the way. The personal statement. I think Katie hit the nail on the head that most everybody on this call and applying is going to have a standard personal statement, and that is okay. Sometimes if you want to be in that amazing 5%, usually you can kind of tell, or like you just have a knack for writing. But if you're not a great writer, I do not recommend trying to overdo it and try to get yourself in that top 5%, because there's a higher chance it's going to go backwards and the wrong way. Yeah. So be okay with it being a good but not stellar personal statement, but do your best, right? And you want to open it as best as you can. And I think there's a lot of different recommendations out there. Like some people like using quotes or stories or something dramatic. Whatever it may be, it needs to be something genuine, authentic about you, because again, the reviewers are reading hundreds of applications, doing their best to be as detailed and thorough as possible, but it's just a lot of words and papers to get through when you're reading applications. So if you can get their attention, that does help a lot. And then, yeah, the kind of cliches and standard statements and fluff. I think, right, it's very easy to fill things with fluff, and that's what you can really take out quickly. And having people to read your application is going to be super helpful here. So they'll recognize when it's fluff. One tip I have is read each sentence and figure out, is that a sentence that only you could have written or someone could have said about you, or anybody else could have written or said that statement, right? If it's something very generic that it could have been about anybody else, it likely needs to be tightened up or made more specific to you. Letters of recommendation. So again, really important what Katie said, it's a relationship that you build, and the content does matter. And I know this is tricky because obviously these are not letters you're supposed to see the content of or know what's in them, but you want to pick the people that you are confident are going to talk about you the best way possible. It can't just be, this so-and-so was in my class and they did the work on time and they got good grades, right? That is not enough, because every other recommendation letter we see is stellar, right? The baseline letter of rec is going to be very effluent and praising the applicant. So that is the minimum you have to shoot for here. There are going to be some like statements that do stand out, like this student was one of the top X% of students I've ever taught in my life. Things like that do stand out. And again, I know this is maybe not the most useful advice because you're not going to see the content of the letter, but find those people who you think can write those statements about you.
One thing I'll add for the letters of recommendation that I think can come in handy depending on your situation is that, just like Aryaman was saying, the content is really important. Like he said, you're not going to see it, but sometimes it is appropriate, depending on your relationship, to suggest to them what you'd like them to cover. It's a little bit of a like walking a fine line, but sometimes you can, like, for example, if I have great science professors and I know that those letters are going to be strong, then perhaps when I approach my PI, I want them to really harp on my research background and my innovation in the lab and leadership in the lab. Like, there are a couple traits that I want this person to talk about and a couple traits I know these people are going to talk about. And so it is, depending on your relationship, sometimes acceptable to say, hey, when you're sending your letters of request, you're going to send an email that says, like, here's all my stuff, like your CV, your personal statement. And then you'd be like, if you feel comfortable writing a strong letter of recommendation that includes these kind of characteristics, that would be so, so helpful. If you think that your relationship is amenable to that, which sometimes I have had. So just think about that. That is something that you can use sometimes to kind of tune in these letters of rec. Oh my gosh. My bad, guys. Here we go.
Here, let me flip to the next one.
Okay.
So this is a really great time to do something we like to call a check-in. I just want to quickly check the chat to see if there's any sort of questions or anything that we can elaborate on, or if you need us to repeat anything. It's one of our two Q&As, for lack of a better word. Additionally, I just wanted to draw your attention to the screen. For being with us here tonight, we're offering a 10% discount on any one of our programs. 10 off web. That's a thank you for being here. Thank you for your time, and just thank you for being attentive tonight. And I know myself, my wonderful two colleagues here, as well as all of the other colleagues on the Inspire team, would absolutely love to get to know you more, whether that be through a one-on-one or some sort of tutoring or admissions counseling perspective. So we recommend you take this code, run with it. It's yours. So I don't actually see any questions in the chat, but something that we didn't necessarily touch on that I think students often ask us is how many variations of personal statements should students be going through? Or maybe you can share how many times you rewrote yours, if you remember.
So I guess I'll start here. Variations, I don't think there's a magic number, but definitely not one. If you think you've nailed on the first try, I can almost promise you haven't. And then needs to be read. I think the key is actually getting it read by multiple people, right? People of different backgrounds, or, not just your family, peers, colleagues, mentors, right? People to look at from different angles. You're gonna go through, at least probably 4 or 5 different iterations before you get something you're happy with. And then the key is starting on time, right? You can't get 5 iterations done that are read by people in a week. That's just not a practical thing. And people, you have to give people time to get it back to you. I believe that's the first part. I forgot what the second part was.
How many times you rewrote yours?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, gosh, yeah. I don't even want to know how many versions, V10 or something crazy like that.
Yeah, I would say, give yourself a long time for these. In my opinion, these they should take months. This should be like a work in progress for months, because you need to, like, at times step away from it and then revisit it. Like, one of my writing professors used to say, sometimes you need to kill your babies, meaning like you love this piece, but it's just not working. So sometimes you got to kill it. And that's like halfway through, you're 2 months in, and you have to start over. So just give these the respect that they're due. They are important for your application, and they should be treated as such in terms of like how much time you allot to them.
And one more question that we get often in terms of letters of recommendation. So for non-traditional applicants who may have a few years in the workforce, who would they go to for letters of rec if they don't necessarily have the strongest connection and relationship with past professors?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things that you can do. And I know that this is kind of looking retroactively, but one thing is the letter of rec can be written beforehand. Like, it is best to ask for it at the peak of your relationship. So if you know that you're going to take a couple of gap years, which I realize is not always the situation, but if you know, ask them when it's the best time to do it, and it can be saved. It's not going anywhere, right? It's just staying in the cloud. So I think that's one helpful thing. And then the second one is, if it has been a while, this is where it gets really kind of tricky and tough. So you have to do a few things. One is try to, in those gap years, try to keep that relationship as active as possible. Check in with that person, meet up with them, do whatever you can to keep that relationship active, and then ramp that up to a point where you feel comfortable again asking them from a letter. And that this is usually a time where you kind of have to remind them about like the things that you did, or what happened in that class. You just kind of give them that information for them to put in your letter. And then I think that the key thing here is that recognize if they seem hesitant, right? If you're not getting a good, clear answer that they feel comfortable writing you a strong letter, then it may be best to pivot. The worst is when they're kind of like wishy-washy, but they finally agree and it's kind of a mediocre letter. That is not going to help you. So you have to be a little perceptive on how they react when you ask them.
Yeah, sometimes these professors are also involved with volunteering activities. So one way that I've advised folks to like continue this contact despite no longer being in their class is like reach out to them, say that you love their class and yada yada, and you're probably going to be applying and maybe not, whatever, but reach out and see if you can at least stay involved in, like, even if it's like quarterly volunteer activities that they host for middle school students or whatever it may be. See if you can get involved in their activities so that you have this ongoing connection with them. It's not always possible. Sometimes they need a TA. Sometimes you can help with grading things, whatever it may be. Just try and find some way to stay involved. And that is easy, can be as easy as reaching out via email and saying, is there some way that I can kind of like stay involved? I love the course. I would love to like be more involved. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but it's easy enough sometimes that professors can always use help in some way. So that is one way I've advised clients in the past that has worked.
Amazing. I don't see any other questions in the chat, so I will let you continue on with the presentation.
All right. Common mistakes, and we see these a lot of the time. So there's simple things you can do. One is typos. I know that's not necessarily mentioned here, but I think that's the easiest one to fix. I mean, there's so many word checks, Grammarly, whatever you want, right? Get rid of the typos and the awkward grammar. So that'll clean up a lot. But in terms of the actual content, right, do not tell me or us what you think you want us to hear, because we can tell when you're writing something that you think you want us to hear. Does that make sense? So focus on yourself, right? Just tell your own story. Even if you don't think it's perfect, it's fine. It's genuine, it's authentic. That matters so much more than anything else, because we just want to get to know you. Med schools emphasize diversity and inclusivity and want to build a really beautiful class of people from different backgrounds. And the only way they're going to be able to do that is to get to know who you are. And it's tough when it's on paper. And then, like we've mentioned a few times already, the more cohesive of a narrative you can build, the more that's going to stick in the reader's mind, right? They're going to associate your name and you with that narrative. And so when they present you at the table, when it comes to admissions committees, right, they can bring that up and share your story for you. But if it's a disjointed kind of Mod Podge story, they don't really know what to present you as, right, when they come to the table. So make it easier for them.
Okay, great. So some things you can do to kind of polish and elevate your application. So demonstrating initiative, this is something that's kind of, in my mind, kind of along the lines of like demonstrating growth. So especially in activities that you've had as a longitudinal kind of experience, demonstrating growth through that process can be so helpful in helping you stand out. So that usually or sometimes can look like, I started volunteering at this clinic. I then applied for a job as an MA at this clinic, and then I became a MA manager, and I started teaching folks how to do the job. Whatever, it's some progression through a longitudinal experience in which you have advanced and learned and grown. So that demonstrates initiative. That demonstrates able to take more onto my plate, able to teach others. It demonstrates so many good characteristics that are relevant to this field. If you can find an activity in which that's happened, that is great. And we want to demonstrate that and really advertise yourself in that way. Showcasing problem solving. So again, another characteristic that happens that is so crucial in medicine is overcoming obstacles. Well, this patient has a problem and I don't know what it is. How are you going to get over it? What are you going to do? You're going to research, you're going to read articles, you're going to consult mentors, you're going to ask other experts in the field. We're going to figure it out. And this is such an important trait in medicine that if you can demonstrate this in your application, it gives us as readers and reviewers more data to suggest that this person is going to be great as a medical student and then great as a physician. So find moments and highlight moments in which you can demonstrate obstacles that you've overcome or problem solving that, was helpful to a team environment or something like that. Resilience, so important. This is the overcoming obstacles thing as well, but like demonstrating that one setback is not going to ruin your world, especially in my mind, when students are asked about resilience and I get an answer like I got a C in a class, that is not enough for me. I think if you look, kind of deep into your life, there are certain things that are so much more challenging, and I would rather know, as long as it's not uncomfortable to talk about, I would rather know those challenging things and how you work through them and how you've overcome them and how it's made you stronger, better, more resilient, because that is what makes a good student and physician. So finding ways to incorporate that. And then finally, once you think you have an application that you're happy with or a personal statement that you're happy with, I say don't look at it for a couple of days and then come back as what you think what a reviewer would see, basically. Try and view it through a reviewer's eyes and see what stands out to you, see what attributes shine through your application and what don't shine that you want to shine, and make those adjustments as needed. Oh, why aren't you advancing? There we go.
All right. Obviously, you're going to probably be wondering, what can I do to stand out? And I wish there was a magic trick or like a one word you could put in, but it's not that way, right? It comes down to building just a really good application that takes time. These are not built in 1 week or one night or even 1 month. These are things that you craft over a long time. And authenticity matters, right? Again, the reviewers have read so many of these applications, they can just easily pick out when a person is being genuine and when they're not. Like you think you can fool them, but I promise you can't. They've just seen too many. So just be yourself. Even if it's not perfect, it's okay. If it is perfect, honestly, kind of a bit of a red flag. So just be yourself. Depth matters. Like we talked about, this is not a checklist process. Does not matter. Yeah, leadership. Yeah, volunteering. Yeah, service. Right. 80 hours each. That's great, right? But it doesn't matter if you didn't take anything away from the experience, right? How are those lessons going to guide you as a physician when you're, down in the trenches and, dealing with difficult conversations with family? How are those prior experiences of you as an undergrad going to help you when those tough times happen? And then the strategy. This does matter, and I think this is where talking to people who have gone through this process helps, right? Unfortunately, not everybody is going to have the application to be a shoo-in at Harvard Medical School, right? I would love if everybody could do that. I think everybody is, deserving in their own ways to do that, but that's just not the reality of the system. So you have to find what your scores and your experiences and what lines up with that school's mission, right? There are schools that emphasize different things. You have Carl's School in Illinois, right? That is meant for engineers who want to do med school. You have other schools who are maybe located in like the southern states who are working a lot with medicine and immigration, right? Or people from different backgrounds. You have people in the East Coast who are working on different things, right? So find that school that you resonate with, and I promise that they would also resonate with your application when they read it. So pick the right school for you and talk to people who have gone through this process.
Okay, so a lot of like these points I think I've already touched on a bit, but things that matter beyond just listing experiences. So this is how you, I also think how you came to that experience, what drew you to applying for that job or applying for that experience, what got you there, your activities there, your growth throughout the process, ideally like advancing levels or something like that, or interactions you had that taught you something during that process. And really like the key to all of these, whenever you're having an opportunity to write about yourself or write about your experiences, is really the introspection that's required, the reflection that's required. That is what we want to see in writing. Like I want to see how this affected you. What things are you going to take with you as a physician? So for example, Aryaman's example of, I brought a warm blanket to a patient in the emergency department, and what I took from it was that really like the medicine is so important, but the interpersonal communication and like rapport building and relationships that we build with these patients can be just as therapeutic. Something like that, right? Like you learn something and you're like, I'm going to do that when I'm a doctor, right? Not just medical, but just like how I'm going to treat people, or like, how challenging it can be to work through insurance stuff. Like sometimes people volunteer in that way. So just like reflect on things for me and write about that. And then demonstrating growth we talked about. So how you evolved in this role, how this role has changed how you see things or expanded your horizons in some way.
All right. Again, like I promised at the beginning, you're going to hear a couple themes that come through. And one is that narrative. It all needs to fit together like pieces of a puzzle as best as you can. And so, step away from it moments periodically, making sure that it captures the message you want. And then when it's done, read it all together as if you were the admissions reviewer, right? Does this make sense? Does this give the message across that you want it to give? When you have other people read it, right? Ask them, what is that message that they're taking away from it? And does that match up with what you wanted them to? And I think feedback can be a bit of a double-edged sword here, right? It is really important to ask people you trust and have worked with, but it's sometimes tough to find the right person to give that feedback, right? And what I mean is that you're going to have some people who maybe are just too gentle and they just don't kind of want to hurt your feelings. And they might just kind of like tell you it's great, right? But in reality, it could use some work. And you have some people who are just going to be maybe way too harsh. And their type of feedback is not going to work well with the type of feedback that you're receptive to. So ask a lot of people. Doesn't mean you have to listen to everybody, right? At the end of the day, it is your decision and you get to decide what goes in the application. But appreciate those different points of feedback. And like I said, I think don't get caught in trying to make every single change that every single person recommends you do, because that's when you lose your own voice.
So last minute things, review your personal statement. This is for spelling, grammar, narrative, all the things. Does it convey what you want it to do? Letters of recommendation, of course, this is probably shouldn't be a last minute thing, but this is just making sure you've got your, T's crossed and I's dotted. Making sure that you have them all the appropriate criteria. So some schools require different things. Actually, there are some schools that require a different number, or they require specifically a professor from here or wherever. So just make sure that you've got all the number and needs and the criteria you're meeting with your letters of recommendation. Of course, you can't really read them. And then final proofread. This is just, double, triple, quadruple check things. You should have read your application. It should make you nauseous how many times you've read through your application. That's how I feel when I finish like a research paper or something like that. I'm like, I never want to see this again. That's how you should feel. Like, you've read it so many times, you've put it into every spell check, grammar check you can find. Everyone you know has read it. Like, that's how pristine this application should be, because that's how important it is. So just make sure you're giving it the time that it's due.
All right. Submitting with confidence matters, right? Be proud of what you've done, right? Your application is not just what you've done over the last couple of months. It's what you've done over the last 4 years to get you, or more, to get you to this point, right? You're taking a huge step to try, go and pursue medical school, and you're going down a very noble route into a profession that needs amazing people like you. So be proud of it. Appreciate everything you've done. And I think one thing that's not mentioned here that's important is submit it on time. Submit it with confidence and on time. One of the, like we said, two big things that will kill you, or like kill your application. One are really bad typos and grammar stuff. Two is submitting too late. I know it's hard with everything that's going on with undergrad or gap years or whatever, but submitting the day the application portal opens means you get verified fastest, means you get your application in front of the reviewers fastest, right? Which means you get your secondaries fastest, which means you get the interview slot the fastest, which means that if you get accepted, you get the first one on the rolling admissions, right? So everything snowballs from the day you start, not apply, from the day you start working on the application. So keep track of time. And if you do everything like we talked about, I promise you're going to have a really great application you're proud of, and it's going to pay off.
Awesome. So we are stepping into our Q&A session, but we would love to hear from you. So what we're requesting, what we're hoping you could do is just take a minute to scan that QR code. It comes back to a survey. It's 5 questions or so long. We want to hear how we did, right? We obviously put a lot of time and effort into these, and we want to make sure that we're providing you the best value possible. So if there's something you can share with us that lets us improve on these sessions or offer better guidance in the future, we want to hear from you. So if you could do that, we would really appreciate it. With that being said, I'd love to hop into our Q&A. Okay, I see a kind of a question in here. Would it be more important to advertise research or volunteering? So research experience or volunteering experience?
I think I think they're both important. It really, in terms of what you want to I think they're both important to demonstrate that you have experience, and if you can get both of them, you should. However, like what you want to emphasize sometimes, like a meaningful activity, that is a little bit dependent on the rest of your application and this narrative that we've been talking about. So if you are someone who is really interested in, let's say, like an MD, PhD track, you're really interested in research and innovation and maybe biomedical engineering, whatever it may be, perhaps that you have a really meaningful research activity that should be in your meaningful activities over one of your volunteer options. Generally, I recommend that we have like a clinical, a volunteer, and a research activity. Some variation of those kind of 3 different strengths that we want to demonstrate in your meaningful activities. But it just a little bit depends, like what you want to push on and emphasize a little bit depends on the rest of your application and really what your narrative and that story, that theme is throughout. I think either can be valuable depending on how you spin it.
Ariman, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that covers it all.
Amazing. Okay. Next question. In terms of secondary applications, are they different for each school? How do primary and secondary applications differ? Really great question.
Yeah, I think, great question. I think there's a couple of things here. One is you're going to see a lot of the same base template essays. And this is something that you can help yourself by pre-writing, right? You're going to get a why this school essay. What is, makes you diverse? Tell me about a challenge or adversity you have, right? Like 95% of schools are going to have a variation of that essay. They might just like make it fancy with different words to try to hide that it's that specific essay, right? So you're going to see those, but then you're going to have 1 or 2 that are a little unique to that school. And I think I don't know if Katie, you've been seeing this too, but I feel like schools are getting a little more like kind of crazier, trying to be creative with the type of secondary questions they've been asking. Like, what is, I think there's one from Hopkins, like, tell me about a time you were like, you experienced like fascination or something along the lines. Or, tell me about what you want your legacy to be. Something just a little bit unique. And those are not really ones you can prepare for, but those are really fun ones to write about, right? And primary and secondaries are completely different, right? Your primary includes your personal statement, your activities, your MCAT, and your letters of recommendation, right? That packet is considered your primary application. The secondary is that like 4 to 7 essays per school that they ask you to write and to submit to them. And there are a lot of resources and websites now out there where they actually show you what that school has asked for in the past in terms of their secondaries. And if they've had it for the last 15 years, they're probably going to have it for the 16th year as well. So
we offer that.
Great. Inspira has that. So, use these tools, make your life easier.
Anything to add, Katie? I see you nodding your head.
No, I totally agree.
Amazing. Okay, so I think this is a really good segue into the next question. So some supplementals ask us to discuss our non-academic passions. Any topics to stay away from, or is there a good theme? What stands out?
This is a good question. I actually think that this is an ideal question for an applicant. This question is just like, tell me something you love that's not medical. And honestly, as a resident who interviews residency applicants, I ask this question as well. I look for their hobbies, and if there's something unique that I have never heard of, certainly I'm asking about that. What I want to hear in that question, and what I think reviewers want to hear with this question, is we want to hear you geek out on something that you are passionate about, because that shows us like how much thought, interest, drive, like information you can really hold and take and explain, and how you explain. These are all things that come up in medicine all the time. Especially in medicine, we're talking about complex physiologic, either procedures or mechanisms that we are explaining to lay people that may not have the same educational background as we do. And so it's important that you can convey things that are complex and interesting to you in a way that is palatable for others. So for all these reasons, this is such a great question. In terms of your question about things to watch out for or stand out with, I think watch out for things are pretty intuitive. Obviously, you don't want to talk about things that are, I would say, controversial. Even if it's on the right side of controversial, I would just steer clear. If it's, I love doing graffiti, for example, don't say anything like that. Just don't even make them question you. So no controversial things. Stands out, I really love a hobby that is different or unique. If I've never heard of it, I'm really going to be into it when you talk about it. So a lot of people say things like cooking and reading, and that's fine. That may be your hobby. That's good. But if you have something a little bit more unique or interesting that aren't just like kind of straightforward things like that, that would be ideal. That would help you stand out. I had someone, someone this last application cycle did like food photography or like barista stuff, like something that's just like a weird little niche thing that you love doing that you know a lot about. That's what you should write about. That will help you stand out.
And yeah, I'm just gonna add 2 quick things here. Things to stay away from. Don't just blatantly disregard the instructions and talk about something academic. Because that's like an immediate no. Right? It's like people who answer the weakness question with my weakness is I care too much, right? Like, no.
I'm a perfectionist. Yeah.
Terrible. Do not do that. So don't disregard the instructions. 2, cool topics, like Katie said, something unique. I had someone the other day who talked about rug making was their hobby, and one person did car detailing, right? Like super cool stuff. But don't just pick up something in the last month before application season because you think you need to fill in a hobby. Because when it comes time to it, I promise you, they're going to ask you about it. And if you can't talk about it like you've done this for a long time, it's going to scream red flag. So
yeah, the worst thing you can do is say play guitar, and then you get someone in your interview room that plays guitar, and then they find out you're a fraud. So don't lie about them. Don't pick something up last minute just to have a cool thing on your application. Just talk about something you love.
Awesome. Okay, the next question. What is the bottom line for shadowing hours? Obviously, someone with like 3 hours won't be able to create a very empathetic narrative to their experience, which I think is a perfect segue from what we just talked about.
Yeah. Totally, your point is totally accurate. Like it is hard, especially as a pre-med, to like get all of these hours and requirements and check boxes that this application cycle like demands of you. So not everything is going to be ideal. Ideally, in a perfect world, you would have shadowing hours with the same physician or group of physicians over a longitudinal course of time, and they can speak to your knowledge base, your ability to learn, your ability to interact with patients, your interpersonal communication, all of these things. That's an ideal situation. That's not always the case. I've had applicants that just didn't have enough or didn't feel like they had enough interaction. It just depends on the experience and the relationship. I would say like 3 hours, like you said, is really not enough to have a meaningful. I mean, I don't want to generalize. You can certainly have meaningful interactions in less than 3 hours, but in terms of listing things for your application, that is certainly not as meaningful as something that is a longitudinal experience. It doesn't show like the growth or the dedication to the field or whatever it may be. So it's not to say you can't have a meaningful, impactful interaction with a patient in one of your random 3-hour ED shifts or something like that. But more is better in that way, like more interactions, more experience with the field, more experience with physicians that may be able to write you letters, things like that. I'm not sure what the bottom line question is. Like if you want a number, I don't really have one. But this is a kind of a situation that's more like the earlier you start, the better. And the more longitudinal and depth you can show in the experience, the better. And that's not just for clinical hours, that's kind of for anything.
Yeah. I think this is one of the things I have my own little pedestal about, in that I think shadowing is not something I typically give a lot of weight to, because 99% of shadowing experiences you don't get anything out of it, or people have a hard time of articulating what it meant to them or what they got out of it. Because realistically, I mean, let's be honest, you shadow somebody, you kind of just like tag along with them in clinic. You have no idea what's really being discussed because you don't have that medical background, or you just don't really know what's happening. And that's okay, right? I'm not expecting you to be, to know all this and basically be a doctor, right? So it's not the hours, but shadowing to make a difference in your application has to have some level of impact, right? I think Katie highlighted some really good things, right? Did you make an impact to a patient while you were shadowing? Or did this physician or practitioner that you were shadowing observe a growth in your knowledge and can talk about it, right? But if it's just listed as one of your basic experiences, Dr. So-and-so, I shadowed them for 20 hours in the cardiology clinic where I saw how to manage patients with heart failure, right? Great. But there are likely other things in your application that are going to matter much more to your candidacy, unless that shadowing experience was truly just brilliant. I don't know if that's just kind of my personal take on it or my pedestal, but I don't know if Katie has any other thoughts on that.
No, I generally agree. It's all about the depth of the interaction, in my opinion. I, as a pre-med, had some very meaningful relationships with people that I shadowed, and it was in a field that I was already interested in. So I put a lot of time in learning and participating or attempting to participate in clinic and stuff like that, and asking questions and whatever. So it just depends on the depth of the relationship. And I think you're spot on. Most of these relationships are just like, come and hang out with me in clinic for a day. And you don't really get a lot from them, but it's all in the perspective and your own kind of growth and introspection about them.
Awesome. So I don't actually see any other questions in the chat. Maybe we'll give everyone a minute or so to get in any sort of final thoughts. We do have about 2 or 3 minutes left in tonight's session. Katie, Aryaman, anything you'd like to add? Anything you can think of that maybe we didn't cover?
Aryaman already said this, but I just want to re-say it because it's important. what we're talking about is like this ideal application. It just doesn't really exist. So no one's application looks like all the things we're mentioning. It can be really, I think, overwhelming to hear all this information and start thinking all these things I need to do now. I should have done them yesterday, right? But no application is going to have every criteria perfectly. You're not everyone. No one's going to have that. No applicant I've ever worked with has had that. I didn't have that. None of my friends that are doctors have had that. So I don't want you to stress on that. These are things that like we mention so that we can optimize what opportunities you do have and optimize your application in the best possible way. But just, I don't want you to sweat that you need to have all of these things done perfectly, because it's just not realistic and it's not going to happen. And that's okay.
Yeah, I think my one takeaway for you, on top of all that and what Casey just said specifically, is being timely, right? That is one of the really simple things that you can do to make your life easier. Work backwards, figure out when application season is, when the applications are due, how long do you need to prepare everything, how long do you need to study for the MCAT, right? And, again, like Casey said, it feels like, oh, maybe I should have started this, when I was an 8-year-old at this point with how much they're asking of me. But do your best, right? And you're going to save yourself a lot of headache and trouble on the back end if you're able to just kind of budget the time along the way and talk to people who have gone through this, right? You're not necessarily a trailblazer or setting out to chart a path. There are people who have walked in your shoes and in these footsteps, so talk to them and get advice as much as you can.
Perfect. I think this is a really great point in the conversation to wrap everything up. Katie, Aryaman, thank you so much. I'm saying your names in that order because that's how you're showing up on my screen. But thank you both for being here tonight. Thank you for your wonderful insights to our audience. Thank you for joining us. We always encourage you to continue the conversation via our consultation. But again, if you have any kind of questions, comments, concerns after this webinar, you have our email, reach out to us and we'll make sure you get your response. I hope everyone has a wonderful week and we'll see you on the next webinar.
Have a good night. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.